All right, before we begin, chapter 23 of Masechet Shabbos, a really fascinating discussion that we're going to have today. Just want to begin by thanking our sponsors for today's shir, sponsored by the Marcus Katzenellenbogen, Pin, and Khan families, to wish a mazel tov to Ari Katzenellenbogen on his bar mitzvah this past Shabbos. And we should always be able to celebrate more simchas together, God willing, for many years to come. So we are about to start the 23rd chapter of Masechet Shabbos. Next week is going to be chapter 24, and then we'll have a big virtual siyum, and we'll have to start Masechet Pesachim just in the next couple of weeks. But it's that the end of Masechet Shabbos is, to me, I think, very similar to the end of Sukkot, where we know that after the holiday of Sukkot, we have the holiday of Shmini Atzeres, which is a machlokes in the Gemara, whether it's a Chag Ne'atzmo or it's attaching itself to Sukkot. But we know that the reason for, as Rashi points out al Torah, and it comes from the Gemara, that the reason for Shmini Atzeres is that Hashem says, Kasher le'al predaschem, that it's difficult for me to see you go. It's difficult for the holiday to end. So we tack on one more day. These last couple prakim of Masechet Shabbos is kind of like Kasher al Predaschem. It's kind of like trying to reel us back in. The Masechta doesn't want us to leave it. And these final Mishnayos are so juicy. There's so much to unpack in every single one. And Emir Hashem, when we finish this round of Masechet Shabbos, God willing, in the future we'll come back to unpack it further. But there's just so much to unpack here. So in the 23rd chapter of Masechet Shabbos, by the way, Charlie, I looked back at the 21st chapter, and I mean, all of the major topics there, we pretty much did cover in the other classes. So I hope I'm not going too far ahead of you guys over here. Am I, Charlie? Am I going too far ahead?
On Monday we did chapter 22. Okay. We did more chapter 22 about fixing barrels and stuff like that.
All right, fine. Yeah. All right, good. So seeing the 23rd chapter now is not a problem. So here we go. Says the Mishnah. So I'm jumping ahead to the third Mishnah over here. The third Mishnah points out one of the very practical laws pertaining to Shabbos, which is lo yiskor adam po'alim b'Shabbos. A person is not allowed to hire workers on Shabbos. V'lo yomar adam lechavero liskor lo po'alim. And you can't say to your friend, hire workers for me on Shabbos. Now this is an incredibly practical and important halacha. A lot of practical ramifications. Today I want to focus on the conceptual elements of the law, as we always do, because if you don't understand the concepts behind the law, then the practicalities are not going to be as meaningful to us, and we're not going to have the tools necessary to be able to ask the right questions when they approach. So what is this halacha of not hiring workers on Shabbos? Take a look at, can you see the right side of my screen? It could be it's blocked by the Zoom box, but the right side of my screen, you see the Bar Tanura. Now, the Bar Tanura is very similar to Rashi in his explanation over here. In general, the Bar Tanura seems to pattern Rashi. Sometimes they differ somewhat, but the Bar Tanura tells us the reason why you cannot make hires on Shabbos, you can't hire workers to do X, Y, or Z, is because, as Rashi says, the Chsiv, as the pasuk tells us in Yeshaya Navi, that mimso chavtzecha v'daver davar, that the Navi tells us that there is a prohibition on there is a prohibition on Shabbos, that is a rabbinic prohibition, that one needs to treat Shabbos differently than they treat the rest of the week. That the things that we do and the things that we speak need to be different on Shabbos than during the rest of the week. I like to use a classic example for this, which is found in the Trumas Hadeshen. The Trumas Hadeshen early 15th century 15th century Ashkenaz posek. He has a Shilas and Tshuva Sefer, a book of responsa. That his book of responsa, it's interesting because he wrote the questions to his answers. So these are not questions that were posed to him, but rather questions that he composed and then provided thoughtful answers to. But I think more striking about the Sefer than that unique historical note was also that the Trumas Hadeshen's approach to Psak Halacha is the approach that we take today, which is the approach that's found in the really the modern day Ashkenaz poskim. He revolutionized the way that Psak Halacha is done, where he tries to be considerate of the different opinions. He, of course, is a Rishon and therefore is authoritative status in and of himself, but nevertheless tries to reconcile the different opinions in order before giving forth his final thoughts and his conclusion to the matter. So he has a fascinating tshuva, which is basically, is one allowed to read the newspaper on Shabbos? Very, very practical question. Is one allowed to read the newspaper on Shabbos? And his answer was basically, well, it depends whether or not you like reading the news on Shabbos. If you enjoy reading the news, and there's an element of tanog, of enjoyment, when it comes to discussing politics or reading what's going on in the world, then certainly there's nothing wrong with reading the news on Shabbos. We have an obligation of oneg on Shabbos to enjoy ourselves, to do things that are enjoyable on Shabbos. But if you are going to end up getting heated you're going to get upset by the news, you're going to get heated by the political discussions and the like, and it may detract from your oneg Shabbos, so then you should stay away from it. Of course, he also says that we need to make sure that the things that give us ta'anug are things like Torah learning, so that way we can spend our time on Shabbos doing that. But you see the consideration that that the Trumas Hadeshen gives to, what do you mean? What would be wrong with reading a newspaper? What would be wrong? What would be wrong with reading a newspaper is because that what we do on Shabbos is different and unique, and it should be treated as such. It's a unique day, it's a special day, a day that we should be connecting with Kedusha, with holiness, and with ta'anug and enjoyment. And therefore, you need to be very thoughtful of all of your activities on Shabbos, even if it doesn't fall into one of the 39 categories of malacha. This is the approach of the Bartanura and Rashi, as I mentioned, as to why one then would not be allowed to hire workers on Shabbos. Again, why? Because if I am going to lischor po'alim, okay, I'm going to hire workers on Shabbos. Basically, I'm doing business on Shabbos. Mekach u'memkar, okay, this is apply equally. I'm doing business on Shabbos. It makes Shabbos feel like a weekday. There's no difference between Shabbos and the rest of the week. Shabbos needs to be different. This is the approach of the Bartanur and Rashi. This is the approach that seems to be accepted by the Shulchan Aruch. As the Shulchan Aruch says in Siman Shin Zayin in Orach Chaim, Aser lischor po'alim. A person is not allowed to hire workers. V'lo lomer la'akum lischor lo po'alim. You can't tell a non-Jew to hire workers for you either. B'Shabbos on Shabbos, afal pi, even though she'eni Yisrael tzarech la'osa malacha, even though you may not need this work to be done el la'achar Shabbos until after Shabbos, kol mashu aser la'asos b'Shabbos, aser lo mala'akum la'asoso. Anything you're not allowed to do yourself, you can't tell a non-Jew to do on Shabbos. Afilu lomer lo kodem haShabbos la'asoso. Even if you tell him before Shabbos to do it, okay, he continues, and all of this, by the way, where the Shulchan Aruch quotes this, is under the rubric of Dinei Shabbos L'Luim B'Dibor, prohibitions of the Shabbos that have to do with your speech. And the first halacha he writes over here, he says V'daver davar, that the things we speak Shelo Yedirecha Shel Shabbos K'derech Sholcho. And in the previous siman, I believe, right over the previous siman Shin Vav, the Shulchan Aruch says Mimtzo Chavtzecha Asurim Afilu B'davar She'eino Oseh Shel Malacha, that the regular activities we do need to be different on Shabbos, even if you're not going to violate a certain malacha with it. Okay, so this is what the Shulchan Aruch says. Comes along the Mishnah Berurah, gives the same reason that we saw in Rashi and the Bartanura. Says the Mishnah Berurah, sir, it is prohibited to hire workers to do business on Shabbos. Sifzeh, v'chein hasifim delakama masha asar hu mishum. These halachos and the previous notes that the Shulchan Aruch made, the previous listings in the Shulchan Aruch of that which is asar, hu mishum mimtzo chavtzecha, are because of mimtzo chavtzecha, dakol b'chal asiyas chavtzav, that the things we do on Shabbos need to be different than the rest of the week. Now, this is not the accepted approach by everyone. Everyone agrees that you're not allowed to do this, right? Can't argue with the Mishnah. The Mishnah says you're not allowed to hire workers, right? Let's just clarify that again. Well, you start Adam Paul and B'Shabbos, Adam L'Chaver L'Scholo Paulim. You're not allowed to hire workers. You're not allowed to do any sort of business on Shabbos. So everyone agrees to that. The question is why? So Rashi told us, and the Bartanura told us, and the Mishnah Berurah told us, and it seems to be the approach of Shulchan Aruch, that you were not allowed to do business on Shabbos because that makes Shabbos like every other day of the week. Comes along the Rambam though, and he says that is not the reason. Rather, it's for a different reason. The Rambam says in Hilchos Shabbos in Perek Chaf Gimel, Halacha Yud Beis. Let's see what the Rambam's context is. He says Kosef, writing on Shabbos, is Ma'afos Malachos, is part of the principal categories of malacha, of work that one is not allowed to do on Shabbos. Not allowed to write a letter. You're not allowed to write even just two letters put together, Aleph and Bet. You're not allowed to put them together on Shabbos. Right now there's a lot of snow in New York, right? So when you have the foggy windows from the cold, so when you're a kid, I'm sure also when you're an adult, something you like to do is, you write onto the, onto the cold window with all the condensation from the cold, right? From the cold air. Or when you're a kid, you blow your breath onto the window and you write a smiley face on it or something. So if you do that on Shabbos, don't write "I love Shabbos." You're better off writing "I like Chil Shabbos." I like breaking Shabbos. Writing on Shabbos is prohibited, and even if it's temporary, it's still listed there Rabbanan. Okay, writing is one of the 39 malachos on Shabbos, but you all know that because we're already 23 chapters out of 24 chapters into Masechah Shabbos. Lefikach, continues the Rambam, therefore, Aser lechol bapuch ukiyotza bo b'Shabbos me'shu kosef. Therefore, a person is not allowed to put on makeup on Shabbos because that is like kosef, meaning that you are illustrating something. Okay, that would be part of the prohibition of kosef. Aser lil vos ulahalavos, and so too you're not allowed to borrow and lend and borrow on Shabbos. Gzeira shemayichtov, because you may come to write. V'chein aser liknos limkor liskor lahaskir gzeira shemayichtov, and so too you're not allowed to do any sort of business on Shabbos because you may come to write. Lo yischor adam paulim b'Shabbos, you're not allowed to hire workers on Shabbos. V'lo yomer lechavero liskor lo paulim, you're also not allowed to ask your friend to hire workers for you. Why? Because you may come to write on Shabbos. So if you were to ask the Rambam, why is it that the Mishnah says you are not allowed to hire workers on Shabbos, not allowed to do business on Shabbos, the Rambam would not say, what would the Rambam say is the prohibition? You may come to write. So it's a different prohibition. It's a categorically different prohibition. We have in Masechah Shabbos, basically, as the Ramban puts it, three different categories of prohibition on Shabbos. There is deoraisa, okay? Cooking a steak on Shabbos, okay? Deoraisa prohibition, one of the 39 malachos, okay? Then there is, in addition to an Isser deoraisa, there is an Isser derabbanan. Now, Isser derabbanan, says the Ramban, can be broken up into two different types of categories. There is something called a malacha derabbanan, which is a act that the rabbis prohibited because the act itself is not in line with what Shabbos is supposed to be. This is not in the realm of Shabbos activities. That's malacha derabbanan. Then there is a gzeira midrabbanan, a rabbinic enactment to prevent you from violating one of the deoraisas. So again, it's a two-step prohibition, right? I don't want you doing this, so you don't end up doing that, the more severe one. I don't want you taking medicine on Shabbos if you are not in the category of someone that should be taking medicine. I don't want you taking medicine on Shabbos. It's a much bigger sugya. That's why I kind of summed it like that. But I don't want you taking medicine under certain circumstances. Why? Because you may come to violate a bigger malacha of misachik b'sam manim, of crushing spices, etc., of actually creating the pharmaceuticals yourself, which at some point in history was a real concern. Okay, I don't want you doing X, so that way you don't end up coming to do Y. Malacha derabanan is something that it is it's an isolated malacha. It's not a two-step. It's not you may come to do this, but that in and of itself is a prohibited activity for its own purpose, for its own reason. Okay. According to Rashi, the Bartanura, the Mishnah Brura, presumably the Shulchan Aruch, the reason why you can't do business on Shabbos is because in and of itself is it was decreed by the rabbi that is a non-Shabbos activity. The Rambam says it has nothing to do with that. Rather, it's a concern you may come to violate Shabbos in a much more severe way by doing business through writing on Shabbos. This is the machlokas in Rambam and Rashi. Okay.
But
comes along.
Both apply, right? I mean, does it really make a difference?
So does it make a difference? Does it make a difference? Very good question, Jerry. It makes a huge difference. A huge difference, says Rabbi Akiva Eger. Jerry looks at this machlokas and he says, well, they both look bad. I am an observant Jew, and therefore I don't really care why, because I'm not really going to do it anyway. You tell me it's bad, it's bad. Okay, sure. But you're going to see now it makes a huge difference. In order to appreciate this huge difference that Rabbi Akiva Eger is going to point out, we have to see the reason the Rambam does not apply mimtzo chatzecha to the prohibition of doing business on Shabbos. Why the Rambam chooses not to explain like Rashi. This is a very important step over here. So the Rambam chooses not to explain like Rashi because he has a fundamental machlokus with Rashi as to what is the prohibition of mimtzo chatzecha, of that your Shabbos activities need to be different to your weekday activities. It's a qualitatively, it's a fundamentally different prohibition according to Rashi versus the Rambam. Take a look at what the Rambam writes over here. Aser lanu b'Shabbos hadibor va'etza v'shtadlus v'shum davar shena'aso so la'achar Shabbos. One on Shabbos is not allowed to speak or do certain activities that would be done after Shabbos. That which would potentially be prohibited to be done on Shabbos. And he continues and he writes like this. Kamosha Pirish v'omer mimtzo chavzecha v'davar davar v'ksiv asos chavzecha b'yom kodshi milvad imhu dvar mitzvah v'yeh dibor chavze shemaim tigon shidaber ba'odam b'shiduche ha'ne'arim ha'ne'aros malamed abanim Torah o kasav o malacha ki ha'eshtadlus be'elu advarim kulam mitzvah. Basically, the Rambam says like this. This is not a prohibition that is just simply in a vacuum of mimtzo chavzecha v'davar davar, that the things we speak on Shabbos or the way we act on Shabbos is different than the rest of the week. That is not a prohibition that is simply in some sort of a vacuum. Rather, it is prohibited to do things on Shabbos that are related to things that are prohibited to do on Shabbos. To explain further, to elucidate further, what I mean is like this. It would be prohibited on Shabbos, let's say I'm a farmer, to go out into my field and examine my crop. I'm not going to touch it. I'm looking at it. I'm calculating in my head what I'm going to have to do. How am I going to harvest it? I'm actively engaged with activity or thought or speech that is directly related to something that is prohibited to do on Shabbos. Okay? I am involved, let's say I am in construction, okay? I do a site visit on Shabbos. Is there anything wrong with doing a site visit on Shabbos? Name me, what 39 malachos am I going to do on Shabbos? What am I going to do by doing a site visit on Shabbos? Zero. No malachos at all. I'm doing a site visit. I want to walk through. And yet came along the Nevi'im and said that it's prohibited to do. When it comes to asking someone to work for me on Shabbos, I'm not necessarily even asking them to do something prohibited. I'm asking them, can you watch can you babysit my kids for me? Can you clean up my house? I'll pay you. Okay, Jerry, I'm paying you to come and take out my garbage on Shabbos. Okay, Jerry's always wanted to be a garbage man. Jerry, here's your dream come true. Okay, no, prohibited. Why? It can't be because memsochap zechav davar davar, says the Rambam. Because what's wrong with doing that? There's nothing wrong with doing that. You see, because according to the Rambam, there needs to be that additional step. That in order for it to fall into the category of memsochap zechav davar davar, it needs to be that the thing I'm talking about or the activities I'm doing surrounding this is directly related to prohibited Shabbos malacha, like standing in the field and looking at my apple orchard, or going to do a site visit, or talking about the article that I am supposed to be publishing in some medical journal. Okay, this is what could lead to. I'm sorry, not lead to, because you're talking about prohibited activities that would be prohibited to do on Shabbos if you actually did those activities. This is the approach of the Rambam. Now, Rashi clearly does not need that additional step. According to Rashi, any non-Shabbos, right? Rashi's taking a much more he looks at the davar as teaching me a Shabbos principle. It has nothing to do with the 39 malachos, according to Rashi. According to Rashi, the davar is simply shelo yedrecha shel Shabbos k'drecha shel chol. The way you speak on Shabbos should be different than the way you speak during the rest of the week. The way you act on Shabbos would be different than the rest of the week, right? Which is basically what the premise of the Trumas Hadeshin was, right? The Trumas Hadeshin was that the question was, can I read the newspaper, right? Why would it be prohibited to read the newspaper? Well, according to the Rambam, there should be no prohibition at all. According to Rashi, though, no, there is what to discuss about that. Because according to Rashi and the Mishnah Brura, right, which how we paskin, there is what to discuss about reading the newspaper on Shabbos, because it's just not Shabbos activity. It has nothing to do with 39 malachos at all. Okay, this is a fundamental machlokus between the Rambam and Rashi about the davar, which is what positions the Rambam and influences the Rambam to take the stance of then why is it that I'm not allowed to do business on Shabbos? Oh, because I may actually come to write something down.
Is Rashi's talking about keeping the spirit of Shabbos, basically.
Exactly.
So isn't that
seems like according to the Rambam,
what,
even though there are indications that the Rambam assumes that there is such a concept of the spirit of Shabbos, but not necessarily a formal din. It's not necessarily a formal halacha.
It's Zachor, it's Yom HaShabbat L'Kodsho. Isn't that kind of saying keep the spirit?
No, it's a very specific law. Yes, you're right. On a principled level, the Rambam agrees that Shabbos is a different kind of day.
Right.
Right? Yeah. From a principled level, there's no doubt, and the Rambam talks about it in a number of different places. But as a formal halacha, as a formalized din, it doesn't necessarily hold roots in and of itself. We may see it manifest in other halachos, but that's because those malachos are their own isolate. Like, I'll give you an example. The Rambam, that's the way the Rambam explains muksa. So that Shabbos is different than the rest of the week. But that's because the rabbis actually formalized the specific halacha called muksa.
So then what is the basis for Rashi's assertion?
This pasuk, this pasuk, this is the way Rashi understands this pasuk in Yeshaya. That it's just this, it's much more broad according to Rashi. Okay, Gidon, good luck with everything, and we'll send you the recording.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks for joining us. Okay, so now, so that I think to answer your question before, Jerry, of so why does it matter? I think we're starting to understand it now. But Rabbi Kiva Eger takes it even one step further. Listen to this. This is Shema. Okay, this is Rabbi Kiva Eger. This is one of the more famous statements found in Rabbi Kiva Eger, where Rabbi Kiva Eger deals with the following question, which is the following. What would be the halacha if I was doing business on Friday? Okay. We did all the paperwork, but for whatever reason, it doesn't really matter what the reason is. Let's stay conceptual for a second, but there's some reason why the deal shouldn't take place on Friday. Rather, it needs to take place on Shabbos. It needs to take place the next day. Let's assume the next day is, let's say, the first of the month. Okay. And there's some bylaws that indicate as such that this type of a deal can only happen at the beginning of a new fiscal cycle. Okay, let's pretend it's something like that. Okay, Shabbos is the 31st. I'm sorry, Friday is the 31st. Shabbos is the 1st. I keep Shabbos. Someone says the question to Rabbi Kiva Eger. I want to get all the deal done on Friday, but the deal is going to kick in on Shabbos. Is that okay? This is the question. Now, this taka does have practical ramifications. This comes up. You'd be surprised just how often this comes up. Okay. What is the halacha? So Rabbi Kiva Eger is machmer about it. He says that he better to not do this. There are poskim that say it's fine. Rabbi Kiva Eger is machmer about it. You can't have a kinyan, you can't have a transaction bichal take effect on Shabbos, even though all of the business took place beforehand. So now we see an inverse of the opinions of Rashi and the Rambam. According to the Rambam, this is a problem. Why? Because there is an issue with doing business on Shabbos. There's an issue with doing business or having business being done on Shabbos, okay? Regardless of whatever you did on Friday. The fact that it is going to be Chal on Shabbos, that means business taking place on Shabbos. Now, according to the Rambam, business taking place on Shabbos is a problem because it says in the Mishnah, you're not allowed to do business on Shabbos. Because you may end up coming to Reich, but regardless, the rabbis established you're not allowed to do business on Shabbos. But according to Rashi, Why did the rabbis establish you're not allowed to do business on Shabbos? In order so that your activities on Shabbos are different than your regular activities. Are you doing anything on Shabbos? No, you did everything on Friday. So according to Rashi, it would seem like there should be no problem. But according to the Rambam, though, there's a big problem. Of course, according to the Rambam, business is still happening on Shabbos. So this is why, so Rabbi Kiva Eiger is machmer for the Rambam. It seems like the poskim are machmer for both opinions, for the Rambam and for Rashi, not necessarily in every scenario. Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik has a very different approach, to all this. This also brings up ramifications as to who can I hire and who can I not hire. Does this prohibition only apply to hiring a fellow Jew? What about hiring a non-Jew to work on Shabbos? There's many, many more ramifications, but I think conceptually it's important to understand the principles involved here, because if we understand the principles, so then we'll at least be more sensitive to the potential issues that may rise. But this is a robust sugya that we're just cracking the surface on. Much more to discuss, but Maseches Pesachim is calling us. So especially with Pesach coming up soon. So we're going to stop here for now, and God willing, we'll pick up next week with the final installment of Maseches Shabbos. All right, we'll stop here.
Thank you.